Okay, so good evening, everybody. This week's Parsha is a short Parsha, more or less kind of short. So this class will not be so long. It's usually a double portion, Vayakhel Pekude, which is the last two Parshias in the book of Shmois. This week, because we have an Eber year, we have a leap year, 2 months of Adar. So all the double portions that are usually double portion Parshias are now split, and they're single Parsha weeks. This week is Parsha Shkalim. We will take out 2 Sifrei Torah. If you remember from today's Halacha class, we read right before Rosh Chodesh Adar. Shabbos Mevarchim. It's a very packed Shabbos. It's Shabbos Mevarchim Adar Beis. This is the real Adar coming up. The one where we celebrate all the joy, the Simcha. We got Tainus Esther, Purim, Shushan Purim. If you're in Israel this year, Purim is going to be, what is it going to be? Thursday night is regular Purim, right? Friday night. Then Friday night. Is that what it is? Oh, Friday night and then Saturday night. Friday night and Saturday night. Why do I say Friday night and Saturday night? Because only in Jerusalem do you celebrate Purim on the 15th of Adar. But outside of Jerusalem, like the rest of us, we'll celebrate on the 14th of Adar. And the day before that is Tainus Esther, the fast of Esther, which we'll speak about when Purim comes up in 2 weeks from now. So it's Shabbos of Varchim, and on we bless the month of Adar Beis. Right, always the Shabbos before Adar, we read the Parsha of Shkalim, about giving the shekel, the half shekel, where Hashem counted the Jewish people, and the shekel used to build part of the building of the tabernacle. So we'll have a separate Torah for that, and it is Vayakhel. Parsha is Vayakhel, and Vayakhel. If you saw Aristeo's, if you follow him on Instagram, like I do. He posted a kind of a funny meme. I'm not going to try to replicate the meme, but the point was, isn't it just a repeat of all the other Parshias? Well, in a certain way it is. And in other ways it's not. So we have 4 Parshas Torah portions that really talk about the building of the tabernacle. Truma, Tetzaveh, Kisisa, and Vayakhel. Now, the first 3 are God speaking to Moses about building the tabernacle. And this one, Moses speaks to us. There was a big miracle. Moses gathered the entire Jewish people. Actually, we kind of gathered ourselves. And he said it to all at once. It was like, standing meeting. And I don't know how he did it with 3 million people, but everybody heard him. He made it happen. He talked about what we have to do, and sort of repetitive, all of the pieces for building the tabernacle and what we need. And the people were like, okay, why did Moses tell everybody? Because we had to give truma. We had to give gold, silver, and copper to make it happen, to build everything that was going on. So the Torah opens up really about keeping Shabbos, and then it moves on to the Mishkan. And all the Torah really says is you should not do work, and you should guard the Shabbos, and don't make a fire. Singles out not making a fire, which is kind of interesting. What's the significance of that? We'll talk about that a little bit. But why is talking of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, adjacent to Shabbos? And Kabbalah explains what the Mishkan, the tabernacle, represents in space. We've spoken about it before. What it represents in space, Shabbos represents in time. Mishkan is the Mishkan is beyond time, beyond space. It has no limitations. That's why there is no, you can do work in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, right? We would make a fire, we would slaughter animals. There were 10 miracles constantly by the Holy Temple. The Ark didn't take up any space in the Holy of Holies. Weird, trippy stuff going on over there because it was beyond space. It was beyond space. And Shabbos represents that in time. So what does it mean? What does it mean that God rested on Shabbos? So One of my favorite lines of all time. This is probably the only time in davening, in prayer, at least during Shacharit, that I really pay attention. I just always catches me. We say, Machadish betuvoy b'chol yom tamid. Hashem recreates the world. Machadish betuvoy. He recreates the world in his attribute of kindness every moment. And Kabbalah explains, and as is brought out really in Chassidus, a couple things over here. First of all, God creates the world within his attribute of good, that everything is good in the world. Now, whether we see it as good is a different story. That's why Chabad Chassidim, when they give a bracha, they say you should have toiv, you should have good, nira v'nigla, and it should be revealed. It should be revealed good. Yeah, we know there's things that are not revealed, like a child. The classic example given in Chassidus is if a child's playing with a knife, he thinks he's having a great time. And but you know it's dangerous for the child to play with a knife. So you take it away from him, and the child starts faint. He cries, he starts crying, and he hates you. And he's in a lot of pain. He doesn't understand. And you can't really reason with him and explain to him why it's dangerous until it actually happens. God forbid something happens. He doesn't really understand. So that's good. You did good for the child, but it's not revealed. It wasn't revealed to the child. So we know that God he's a kol yachol, he can do anything. So when God wants to give good, he can always make it revealed good. He doesn't have to make it non-revealed good. Whatever you want to accomplish by, having it not revealed, the goodness not revealed, you could do it revealed and it'll accomplish the same way. You're God. You can do whatever you want. So we demand from God that all the time. But nevertheless, the truth is, nevertheless, God, we accept the fact that God does create the world within his attribute of goodness. But that's not the part that I want to really focus on. B'chol yom tamid is what I want to focus on. God recreates the world at every moment. In Shar Yichah Ve'amunah, which is the second part of Tanya, it explains that the natural state of the world is not to exist. God has to constantly create the world he has to speak the world into existence. Right? God spoke and the world came into being. So the default is that the world should not exist, according to Tanya in Shar Yichah Ve'amunah. So what does it mean that God rested? Obviously, God is constantly recreating the world. He's constantly speaking the world into creation, even on Shabbos. So Chassidus explains that it's really just a mashal. It's a parable. What does it mean that God rested? So, for example, when you're writing something, you're using your mind to write down the idea. What's happening to the idea, though, is it's being what's called mitzumtzum, contracted. In order to accomplish, you can't just write the way your mind thinks. I can't just take my mind and put it on a piece of paper. You have to contract it and figure out, now, okay, how do I write this down? And it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of contraction and thinking and editing. What happens is that when a person rests, according to Chassidus, the power of intellect returns to its regular being. Yeah, if you're not trying to communicate an idea in your mind, you're just letting your mind be. It's in its source, so to speak. It's not thinking about the outside. It's just being. It's just being who it is. It's in its true state, not in a state of contraction. That's what's happening on Shabbos. That we're now within the world where God always creates the world through speech. And I've explained this many times, but it's important for me to explain it again. I apologize over here. When God creates when I speak to you, I'm revealing my thoughts. But there's a lot more going on in my brain than I'm able to express in my speech. Speech does reveal, and the only way you're going to be able to know what I'm thinking is if I reveal it to you through my speech. But it's only a ray. There's it's incomparable. It's like a drop in the ocean to what I'm really thinking. And then what you're thinking is a drop in the ocean of what's going on in your subconscious. That's an even deeper level within myself or within oneself. So what's happening on Shabbos is that there's no more speech. The world is being created within God's mind. It's a much more elevated state. It's much more closer to God. You can't see it, but it's much closer to me, my truest self. Thank God, you don't see what I'm thinking, perhaps, let's say, yeah. Or thank God I don't see what you're thinking all the time. And hopefully you have some sort of filter between your mind and your speech, unless you're a tzaddik, perfectly righteous person. But but what you would agree with me that what's going on in your mind is it's much more true. It's a true part of yourself. It's much closer to your soul. It's much closer to who you really are. And even within your mind, your subconscious is even more closer to who you are. So what's happening on Shabbos, according to Kabbalah, is that the world is created, but within God's speech. Within God's mind. And everything is elevated to that level. Even food, physicality, materialism, everything. And if you want to know, first of all, it's called a state of Aliyah, and it's in the world of Chachma of Atzilas. Chachma means like wisdom, the mind. And that's why we try to eat, by the way. We try to eat on Shabbos. That's why do we try to eat on every single day? Every holy day, we try to eat. There's a real thing about eating, and especially meat. Or especially fish, for sure, you should try to have on Shabbos. And if you can have meat, you should really take part in meat. I don't always have meat on Shabbos, but I certainly try to have fish. Because everything is now in an elevated state. So even the meat, what happens is when you eat something, it becomes part of your flesh. When you make a bracha, I'll just give you some Kabbalah 101. I know this is some early Chassidus that we learned. When you make a bracha on something, a blessing on something, the energy, the spiritual energy of that item is infused. Let's just give a better example. On Shabbos, you make a blessing on something. You bless your wine. You bless wine. We have to bless wine because what happens is the spiritual energy of Shabbos becomes enclosed in the words that you're saying of the bracha, and they become infused into the food. What happens to the food? We consume the food, which is physical, and it becomes part of our physical flesh. We're now a walking, talking piece of Shabbos or Yom Tov or whatever holiday it is. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to elevate. We don't want to live in the world. God doesn't want us to live in the world of Chachma or Keser, these higher levels. He wants us to live in a physical world. So whenever there's a time to take advantage of making spiritual, materializing the spiritual, taking something spiritual and making it part of our physical flesh, because Shabbos is going to leave. We're going to go back to the physical world, the world of Asiyah, the world of speech, Dibur, Malchus. We're now an elevated person. So we take advantage. God wants us to take advantage, infuse the food and eat the food. So you should try to eat a lot of food. There are certain things, especially meat, which the Torah says is difficult to try to sift and to try to elevate, because it brings on a lot of desire. There's a lot of, I don't know what a better word to say, but like desire. There's a lot of like negative kind of desire, ego, materialism, doing it for the wrong reasons. Meat tastes great. So I'm not necessarily thinking about, I'm doing this to enliven my body so I can serve God better. I'm doing it because it's what's called a taiva. It's a desire. I'm doing it because I just have a desire to eat it, physical, base, very base. But on Shabbos, because everything's elevated, it's an opportune time to elevate meat, to take part in meat, because it itself is elevated. They're actually a Chassidim. I don't know if it's just Chassidim, but I think it's like a Chassidim, not Chabad. Chabad actually apparently makes fun of people who do this. I don't know, whatever. It's a little insider thing. But what they do is they eat and they say, l'shem Shabbos Kodesh. Yeah, for the sake of Shabbos Kodesh, and they eat. And they're eating. Yeah, every time before they take a bite, they say, l'shem Shabbos Kodesh. I'm doing this for the sake of Shabbos. But whatever. Chabad Chassidim are like, no, you're not. Whatever. You won't see Chabad Chassidim do such a thing. Because we're not, let's be honest, we're not sensitive enough to really, it's by design. We're not sensitive enough to really appreciate it right now. We're on the footsteps of Mashiach. It says in Talmud that the generation before Mashiach arrives will be the most insensitive to godliness, but yet will be the most, the strongest searchers, the ones who will really bring it, have the strongest desire for truth, because we're so far away from it. We have the strongest desire for it. So to say that, like, I really sense Shabbos, the Kedusha of Shabbos, or, it's not so, whatever, kind of poke fun at people that kind of, that think they are. It's not nice. I don't do that, but I have seen it done. one of the things, and to get into a little bit more of Kabbalah, it's not just, the world doesn't become elevated just to the level of Chachma, wisdom, but what's called the level of Keser. Keser literally means a crown. What's a crown? A crown, Chabad call their hats crowns. That's why I put my hat on. It sits on top of your head and it surrounds you, but it's not part of you. It's you. It doesn't come to your conscious self. What am I saying? There's the subconscious part of you, which is more you. It's closer to your essence. It's closer to your soul, but it's more encompassing. It's beyond your ability to consciously grasp. So we say it kind of surrounds you. You can feel it, you can sense it, but you can't articulate it. That's why it's like subconscious. We hope it comes to the conscious, and then even more so, we're able to take action. But it's a deeper part of yourself. It's called the level of Keser, which is Ratzon, which is desire. It's a much deeper part of who you are. The Kabbalah says that's where the world goes. The world goes in the world of Keser. On Shabbos, by the way, it gets more and more holy. What's happening is Friday night, which is interesting because Friday night, I feel like you feel the most holiness. Unless you're for the most part, it feels like the most holy. But it's constantly elevating. Once Friday night comes in, we're moving deeper and deeper within to God's Keser. So therefore, what is the holiest time on Shabbos? The moment right before Shabbos is going to end, between Mincha and Mariv. It's called Raivin de Raivin, the secrets of the secrets. That's what it called in Kabbalah, Raivin de Raivin. In Chabad, we usually don't eat. We don't make a meal. We eat maybe a little bit, but we sing Nigunim, very sublime, deep Nigunim. When we say deep words of Chassidus, try to do it by heart, to try to express the elevation of the day, of the moment, the most sublime moments of Shabbos. So what does it mean that we shouldn't make a fire on Shabbos now that we're living in the world of spirituality? I took you now into the world of Keser and the Raivin, the Raivin. So what does it mean that you shouldn't make a fire on Shabbos? Says the Torah, says the Gemara, the gates of Gehenim, the fire of Gehenim, whatever that is, it's spiritual. The fire is closed on Shabbos. Yeah, the shop's closed on Shabbos because everything, even all of creation, not just the physical world, but every part of creation, all the malachim, all the angels and souls and everything, are all elevated on Shabbos. So therefore, nobody has any, nobody's getting, there's no purgatory, so to speak. There's no refinement. There's no necessity for refinement on Shabbos. On Shabbos, we don't ask Hashem for anything. If you see in the liturgy, in the prayer, we're not asking for anything. We're not asking for any refinement in ourselves. We're just praising God because we're all elevated at that moment. So there's not to say you shouldn't ask Hashem for certain things. Obviously, we do mishabeirachs. There are certain things, mishabeirach for someone who's sick, or we ask people for healing. There is, and you can in a private way, we do ask Hashem for whatever we need. For women, candle lighting, that is the opportunity. You make the blessings, and you should ask for what you need at that moment in time. Not just for yourself, but for all of Klal Yisrael, anybody, the whole world. But you won't see in the liturgy, you won't see actually in the siddur like we have during the week, requests for anything. You should, rebuild Jerusalem. I guess we do say. We do ask for Mashiach to come, but we don't ask for, the people who speak slanderous against us. They should be caught, and these things that we would normally say in the weekday. So that's what it means. That's one of the reasons why we don't have fire on Shabbos. Okay, so just going into the Mishkan, a little bit about Shabbos. You can ask any questions that you want. There are 39 creative acts spoken about that we're not allowed to do on Shabbos. Where does it come from? Well, the fact that Shabbos, when the Torah speaks about Shabbos adjacent to the building of the Mishkan, we know, the sages tell us, that Moses taught us, that work refers to the work done in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle. So there are 39 things. I'm not going to get into 39, although that is what Rabbi Silberberg is going to be talking about on Wednesday nights. He's going to be talking about, now this is exactly what he's going to be talking about, the different types of acts, and where do we see that in the Torah. So why can't we cook, for example, on Shabbos? Because they would cook herbs to get the color to make dye. So they would make dye. What would they dye? They would dye the curtains. Certain things in the Mishkan, we know that God said has to be made of wool and crimson wool, crimson, like a crimson red and purple and all these. So they had to dye herbs. They had to create herbs. So they would cook the herbs and they would make the dye. I don't exactly know how it's done. I'm sure some of you do. I don't, but I know that for a fact. So we don't cook. So you can't cook. Cooking is referred to, how did they cook? They would cook with boiling water. So cooking is referred to boiling water, which opens up in halacha, in Jewish law. Well, what about baking? Is baking considered cooking? There's no water involved. Is it only with water? What about with oil? Is oil considered cooking? And this is like all talked about in halacha. You can't do any of it, for just to let you know. You can't do any of that stuff. Sewing can't be done. Why? Because they would sew the curtains together. We can't write. Why would they write? Why can't we write on Shabbos? You can't write because there were planks that were, there were planks around the Mishkan, like the wall. How would they know which plank went to which plank? Next, they would disassemble, and then when they went to travel, and then when they were settled, because the cloud told them to settle here, or the fire at night told them this is where God wants you to camp here, they would reassemble the Mishkan. And they had to do it very quickly. How would they know where which plank went to the next one? They would write, insert plank A here, and this is the top and this is the bottom. They would have to write. So we know from that we can't write on Shabbos.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So is cooking and dyeing two separate prohibitions on Shabbat?
No, I don't think so. No, it's cooking. It's cooking. It's cooking. Cooking is the prohibition. How else do you dye?
Like I knew like dyeing fabric, like changing its color is prohibited, but I didn't know if it was part of the same prohibition and it's just like.
So I think that's rabbinic. Once you already get to like something like that, if it's not actually done, then there's a whole bunch of rabbinic, which I'll touch briefly upon. The Toradic thing is cooking to make color, to change the color. And then what the rabbi said was anything that when you try to change the color of a substance, that is what's called a tolda, an offshoot, literally a child of cooking. Specifically cooking. That makes sense. So it might not necessarily be even though it's not the exact way it was done in the Mishkan and the Holy Temple. If it looks like that, rabbinically, it's prohibited. So it all does fall under cooking, though. Yeah, Dan, you have a question?
Yes, Rabbi. Tanning leather isn't not very similar to dyeing when you tan leather.
It could be. You sure can't tan leather on Shabbos, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a very outside of cooking.
A Toradic problem or a rabbinic problem.
Yeah, it is actually painting leather is considered also dyeing. I've seen in Morocco how they dye leather. How they paint leather. So it's literal dyeing.
Literal dye.
Color. Yeah.
Is it done with hot water? It has to be done in order.
Yes, it is hot water, but not boiling water.
Okay,
It's
I don't
just
think it has to
hot
be
water.
boiling. Yeah.
Yeah,
Very
yeah,
good.
it's just hot water to catalyze the dye to, kind of like efficiently speed up the coloring process because enzymes kind of.
Very good. Yeah. So then,
Yeah.
okay. And it's going to matter what it's Toradic or rabbinic. And we're going to get to that in a second. You can't make a knot on Shabbos. You can tie your shoe on Shabbos, but you can't do a double knot because you're making it kesher kayemis. You're making it a everlasting knot, a knot that shouldn't be undone. Once again, by the way, there's a proper way to tie your shoelace, there's an improper way to tie your shoelace. If you want to know the proper way to tie your shoelace, which I'm sure none of you are doing, it's a TED Talk. I'll send it to you. Just remind me. You don't need to ever double knot, for your shoes. I'll show you a way. But why can't you have knots on Shabbos? Because we had to catch a snail type fish. I don't know, half snail fish thing. Called the chilazon. The chilazon had blood that was used to dye to make blue. It was to make blue tzitzis. We have to have blue on our tzitzis. We spoke about this before. Where do you get that blue dye? How come we don't use it? Why can't we just use blue any sort of blue, because it has to specifically come from the chilazon. I'm not sure which, I forget which Rebbe said he does know which the chilazon is, but it hasn't really been accepted amongst the Jewish people. We don't know what the chilazon is, but nevertheless we had to make nets to catch it, to use the blood from the chilazon, so therefore we don't make knots.
Question.
Yeah.
So if it was like a snail, how does halacha deal with like using other products from non-kosher animals? Like if you don't just eat it, like if you use it for dyeing.
Sure. What about selling? This is part of the getting smicha. There's something called hana, just very briefly. There's not eating it, there's not tasting it, and then there's another set of like selling it or benefiting from it. So some things you can benefit from, some things you can't benefit from. So pork, you can benefit from. You can benefit from pork. Milk and meat, you cannot benefit from. So if a cheeseburger, I can't sell a cheeseburger, so to speak, and make a profit off it. Theoretically, you can sell pork. You can sell pork. Now rabbinically, it's a bit of a problem. It's a bit of an issue. In the land of Israel, you're not allowed to sell. You're certainly not allowed to sell pork. That's clearly in the Torah. But there are certain things. There's something called hana, pleasure, like benefit, like receiving money for it, monetary payment. Can you use it out for something else? I mean, there are certain non-kosher animal stuff that we use. Let me just think. I mean, first of all, you can have crocodile skin shoes. You can do that, no problem. And you can even use for Torah, you have to use a hide from a cow. The cow doesn't have to be shechted properly. Should try to, but it doesn't have to. So there are definitely differences. It's a very good question. It opens up a lot of discussion. Some things we don't do. We don't play instruments on Shabbos, but that's not from the Torah. You can play an instrument on Shabbos, but the rabbis went ahead and said you may come to fix it, and there's something called makbeh patish. You're like making a vessel, completing something to make it in use. So something that wasn't useful, but something needed one more screw in it. If you put that screw in and now the item becomes useful, that's an issue. You created something now. You made something useful. You brought something into use. That's a problem. You get what? It's called boina. It's called building. Building is defined as completing an item. Now it could be used. So playing an instrument again on Shabbos is not a problem, but because it might break something or something, you might need to fix something. Also, which is a bit controversial. I know some people now are trying to push it the other way. A bicycle on Shabbos could be pretty problematic because you might come to fix it. So of course you're going to say, well, what if I have an all plastic bicycle and if something breaks, you can't fix it? Okay, there's people that argue that maybe you could ride a bicycle on Shabbos. But we tend to not try to do that. Try not to use a ball on Shabbos because you might come to blow it back up if it pops. Whatever. You can ask your local Orthodox rabbi.
What about skateboarding?
Skateboarding would fall under the same category as a bicycle. You can argue that like I'm not going to fix it. I'm for sure not going to fix it, and everyone will believe you. But we just try not to do it. Try not to do it. Not to say you won't see people that do it. People have arguments that it's okay.
Go for a walk or stay.
Go for a walk or what?
I said go for a walk or stay.
Yeah, exactly. Use your legs, man. Just kidding. Okay, so some creative acts though are permissible. First of all, you can push your chairs around in your house, even though you might come to sweat and it's a lot of work. Yeah, you got to move tables up and down. You can do it on Shabbos. It's not a problem. That's not one of the 39 creative acts. Classic one is relations on Shabbos. You're creating a human soul. That's okay. In fact, it's even a mitzvah. Any sort of, so some things that you might not think are work or considered work. Yeah, the classic thing, well, I don't find driving my car on Shabbos to be work. Yeah, but there's combustion, there's making a fire. Obviously, the argument then comes, what about electric cars? Is electricity considered rabbinic or it certainly would be a problem, but is it a Torahic problem or a rabbinic problem? Is electricity a problem from the Torah? Is it considered making a fire or not? So most hold that it's rabbinic. It's not considered making a fire. It would not, turning on electricity is not a problem according to the Torah. Which brings me to another point, which is a huge discussion, which I'm not going to get into. The Torah says all these acts of like sewing and writing and building a fire and all these different things, the way they did it in the Holy Temple was they did it what's called straight, which means they used their best hand to do it. So if they were righties, they would use their right hand to build these ideas, build these instruments, build these acts to do the work. They would use it like regularly. I'll help you understand it in this way. If you turn on a light with your left hand, so to speak, your left hand, you're a righty, but use it with your left hand. You never turn on a light with your left hand, or you do it with your elbow. So that's actually not a Torahic problem. If you were to light a fire using your bad hand, or using it in some weird way, lighting a fire in a weird way, let's say you took the match in your teeth and you put it against the box and then it lit up, that's not a problem according to the Torah. The Torah says it's only a straight way. Now the rabbis came ahead and made what's called the siyag. They made fences to make sure that we don't come to, you want to stay far away from doing something prohibited from the Torah. Chayiv karis. It's like a big cut off your soul. It's like a big problem. But from the Torah's perspective, it's fine. Now, let me tell you something interesting. Whenever the rabbis made a decree, they always made a loophole. They made a loophole so that you would know that this is from the rabbis and it's not from the Torah. Don't think we're adding to the Torah or subtracting from the Torah. So there are certain situations when it would be okay to turn on the light, especially if you're going to use your left hand. I'm not going to tell you too much about that right now. We'll say that for halacha class. But there are certain times when, for example, let me give you another example. Flushing a toilet on Shabbos should be a problem, seemingly, right? Because you flush the toilet, there's electricity being used at some point. It does something with a plant. It turns on like a pump, and it comes out. Electricity is being used. But because it's so indirect, it's called grama. It's so indirect. It's not a problem according to the Torah, because you're not really actually touching anything electrical, or you're not touching any fire. You're not building anything directly. So from the Torah, it's not a problem. But you might think from the rabbis, for sure, it should be a problem, because at some point there is electricity being used. But the rabbi said, no, for kavod habriyos, literally means the honor of creation. In other words, in order to not be embarrassed, you're not looking filthy is part of your honor. Not smelling is part of your honor. You're not allowed to be filthy. You're not allowed to smell. So the rabbi said it doesn't apply. We don't apply our rabbinical stringencies to kavod habriyos when it comes to a situation of stench or filth, something that might turn somebody off. It's like just to give you a quick example. When people become more become more religious, the first thing they say is like, how can I possibly flush the toilet? It's a problem. And it's because it's called kavod habriyos. There's other things called hefsid meruba. If you might come to have a great loss, like let's say power goes out. I guess that wouldn't really be a problem. But what I would just say, something is outside of an erev, so you can't carry, but it'll be a great loss. There's like a lot of money there. So normally you can't ask someone not Jewish, especially, to carry it for you, but because it might be a great loss, you can ask them. It's called hefsid meruba, or whatever. It can be any sort of item, any holy item. You want to know a very interesting factoid? I'll tell you something very interesting. You're not allowed to write on Shabbos. If, however, it comes to buying land in Israel, in the land of Israel, from a non-Jew, so a Jew will acquire the land. A Jew is allowed to violate Shabbos and write. He doesn't have to get somebody else to write for him. He could write with his good hand the contract, sign the contract, and receive the land on Shabbos. The Torah is explicit on such a thing. So it's called getting back the land, settling the land.
So is it only in Jerusalem?
In Israel.
Or just the whole Israel, but not in America?
Not in America. And it's only biblical Israel. Eilat in Israel is actually biblical Egypt. It's not part of the land of Israel, interestingly enough. And so, also, if you want to know Gaza, it's not really, Gaza is kind of controversial. I'm saying even from a biblical perspective. We didn't really, when Ezra came back and we reconquered the land of Israel, took over the land of Israel, we never settled the area of Gaza. So, whatever, it's Tzarech Ian. We'll look into that. Maybe we'll ask Rabbi Silverberg to do a class on that or something. Some other things I just people find to be pretty interesting. You're not allowed to make a hole in the ground because they would take spikes and smash the spikes into the ground to keep the tarp up, to keep the walls up. But if your intention is not to make a hole in the ground, your intention is to just have dirt. Now, it might, of course, when you want to dig out dirt, you're going to make a hole in the ground. But that's not my intention. From the Torah, that's not a problem. That's not a problem. You can go ahead and dig. You can go ahead and dig in the ground because I'm not trying to just dig for the sake of digging. I'm trying to get dirt. Now the rabbis go ahead and say you can't do that. So we don't do that. But intention is is from the Torah, from a Torah perspective. Intention is very. You take intention. You take into account intention. Okay, so here's something that you can do. You're not allowed to pluck your hair out on Shabbos. Whatever, it's uprooting. It's called maybe charisha. It's like it's part of uprooting. You can't uproot things. Now, when you brush your hair on Shabbos, it could be that some hair might come out. But if that's not your intention, and you're trying really, and you do it in a way that the bristles are very soft. So you're really minimizing the probability of hair being uprooted. You can go ahead and brush your hair on Shabbos. Even rabbinically, you can brush your hair on Shabbos. Now, with strong bristles, you shouldn't do, because there's a very good chance that you'll uproot hair. But if the chance is very minimal and you're trying to be very careful, again, I guess maybe it falls under Kavod Abrius, looking honorable, you can go ahead and brush your hair on Shabbos. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Building, I'm just moving on to the Parsha. So something very, why does the Torah speak about, it's from Kabbalah, why does the Torah speak about building the Mishkan 4 times, 3 or 4 times, really 4 times? Because in order to be spiritual, you have to you have to look into the details. We're retold all the details of building of the tabernacle, because we might I feel spiritual. Yeah, people say I feel spiritual, but as a Jew, we want to be real, and we don't just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean it's true. God is telling you, you want to reach like true spiritual, you want to really feel your soul. Now, it doesn't mean from time to time God doesn't open up how does it explain? God doesn't open up the channels for you to experience certain things in order to get you aroused. There's a mimer, there's a Chassidic discourse that you learn, that you say over the chassan, the groom will say before his wedding. It's called Ani Lo Deidi V'Deidi Li, and explains there in the Chassidic mimer, the Chassidic discourse, that when you first meet somebody, there's what's called a hamshacha chitzonius. There's a draw, a very external, superficial draw. Yeah, it's sort of almost like lust, so to speak. Something, it's very external, but it's necessary. It's necessary because you need a hamshacha chitzonius, something a little bit more external, more encompassing, something that you really can't articulate, to draw you in to then build to get the relationship going. Relationship takes a long time. It's not just that lust will dissipate as it should. That's part of the and then real love will come in. Real love means real appreciation, real giving. It's not about what you do for me, it's about what I do for you. But God wants to have a relationship with you, and sometimes we're far away. Might be in the daytime. Yeah, it happens, right? So, but God will open up the channel a little bit to remind you. He strokes your hair, so to speak, a little bit to draw you in. But now the real relationship begins in the details, really getting involved in the details. And God says that's how you really reach true spirituality, true really kedusha l'kos. It's a different type of spirituality. It's not just spirituality; it's godliness. It's a whole different game. That's the difference between what Tanya is part of what Tanya is trying to give over. That you might feel spiritual, and that's called ruchnius, but we want elokus. We want godliness. It's a whole different game over here. The true energy. So it's retold many times because God is saying, I need you to pay attention to these details. Kind of like when my wife always has to retell me things many, many times. Let's see over here. Okay, or Chaim, we get into a lot of the idea, why is there a whole concept of why gold, silver, and copper? Shouldn't we have just given gold? Gold is the most expensive, it's the best. Go big or go home. So the Rebbe explains really that the different types of material, the different metals represent the different types of Jews. The gold represents the Baal Tshuva, the one who has been far away and yet is in a state of return. It's not actually someone who's been far away. The truth is, it's not someone who's been far away, according to Chassidus. It's not like a Baal Tshuva is not somebody who is messed up and then came closer. That's the Talmud's explanation of a Baal Tshuva. But the true definition, I shouldn't say the Talmud's explanation. That's just a very colloquial explanation of what a Baal Tshuva is. The truth is, a Baal Tshuva means someone who's in a state of perpetual return, trying to go deeper and deeper and strengthen the relationship. He always feels that he's distant, or the neshama feels that it's distant, so it's always trying to move closer. That's teshuvah, means to return. It's always trying to return. You don't have to mess up in order you don't have to wait for a problem in order to strengthen the relationship. You can put in effort constantly to strengthen the relationship. So that's represented by gold. Silver represents the tzaddik. Silver, it's very straightforward. Yeah, it's like a malach. It's like an angel. It just always does the right thing, almost like a goody two-shoes. It's not a negative thing, but it's not what God really wants. God wants the Baal Tshuva, the one that's always searching, not just living off of his nature. And copper represents the rasha, the one who sins. That even the lesson being that even the sinner can give to the building of God's temple, God's home. He has the ability to serve God and make his contribution to his people. We never leave out the rasha. We spoke about before. One of the 11 incense was the chelbana, which was very stinky. Yeah, some Jews are stinkers, but nevertheless, we have to, in order to make it part of the incense, which is the most sublime of the offerings, you have to have the stinker there. Which I always appreciated about Yiddishkeit, about Judaism. I'll just end it over here with this one last idea. Probably the only time in history where there was a campaign for fundraising, and the person who was leading the campaign said, "Okay, it's enough. I don't want any more. No more money." The only time in history, especially in building of certainly in the building of a synagogue. What happened was Moses said, everyone come and bring, these are the vessels we need to build for the Holy Temple. Some of them have to be gold, some of them have to be copper and silver. Reach into your pockets and your tents and bring them over here. It says that the men came with the women, by the way. The men came with the women. The women led the way. The men weren't so interested we weren't so interested in giving up our what we had, our very unhard worked money. Yeah, our hard-earned income, we weren't really so quick to give it up. The truth is, we didn't really work hard from it. We had it, but never mind, we were a little bit greedy. But the women led the way, and the Torah says over here, this is where we see that the women didn't take part in the golden calf. Even though the Torah says that the women gave from their nose rings and their bracelets, the Medrash is very quick to tell us the men took it from them and gave from the women to build the golden calf. The women did not take part in the golden calf, and in so much so, they were the first ones to really give to the tabernacle. Now it says what happened was every person called Ish Asher Nasa Liboy, any person who was willing, called Ish Asher Nasa Liboy, literally means any person whose heart lifted them up to give to the temple gave. The heart literally lifted them up. What does that mean? So the Ramban explains, and I think also the Abarbanel, that what happened was everybody had a talent. We all had talents when we lived in Egypt, and we can relate to this today. There were certain people that had talents, but they were latent. They could never have been expressed because they were never in an environment that would allow them to express it. What happened was when it came time to building the temple, and God said, we need craftsmen, we need people who were good with their hands, artists, musicians. The people felt it inside of themselves. There were people that are like, this is me. This is who I am. I'm an artist. I am I'm good at fashion. I'm good at music. Even though I've never done it before, my heart is lifting me up to this space, to this place. So those people, they started to give, and those people got involved, and they were giving everything, and they were giving well beyond the necessity, because they were so consumed, it was like a light to its source, a moth to a flame. It was like, this is the expression of who I am. And that was fine. But what happened was Moses said, okay, enough. What happened was Moses started to see that people were giving because of their nature. It was their nature to give, and not because God told them to give. Which is, I would love to have a neighbor that would, by nature would love to just give me everything, But nevertheless, we have to do things because God tells us to do it. Now, we have to use out our talents for God, but it becomes a bit toxic. It can become problematic. It's about myself. It's not really about the other, about the relationship. It's getting too far. I'm mixing myself, too much of myself in you. It's not really about you. The famous story there was a fish. There was a king who loved carp. He loved carp, and he would always go around, I love carp. And Rabbi David Burke, I think, gave this story over. It's a very famous tale. The king loved carp, and one day they said, we got carp for the king, and the king was so excited, and they brought the carp in, and the carp they put the carp down, and the king said, I will be the one to flay the carp. And he says, I love you, carp. And then the carp yells out, you don't love me, you love yourself. You love what I do for you. You don't actually love carp. If you love me, you wouldn't kill me. The same thing. It was like we were kind of borderlining this thing. And so Moses said, okay, it's enough. We had more than enough than we needed. Stop the donations. So some people might have mitzvahs that they really love, that they really connect with. But you have to make sure that you have the proper motivating reason for doing it. That also just doesn't apply to your relationship just with God. That's your relationship with anybody. Why am I doing this? Why am I saying this? It's something that we have to work on for the rest of our lives. But nevertheless, it's something to keep in mind. I'll just end with this one last thing because I think it's actually just kind of fascinating. It says that when the women spun the wool necessary for the around the tabernacle, the covering of the tabernacle, they spun the wool while the wool was still on the goat or the lamb. In other words, they didn't shear it and then, like you normally would think, they'd shear it and they'd have it and they would start spinning it. No, they did it while it was still attached to the animal. And why was that? Because they're trying to do the craft of spinning it as pure as possible. There's a concept of tuma. It's a spiritual concept. We spoke about it many times, especially in halacha. Things can become tameh. They're very intricate laws. One of the ways of a spiritual impurity, let me just tell you a couple things over here. There's no problem of purposely becoming impure, spiritually impure, unless you're a Kohen, or unless it's the times of the Beis Hamikdash. But today, there's no problem of becoming impure. If you can try to avoid it, you could, but it's something you just have to do it. You're burying a dead body, you're going to become impure. But that's not a problem. That's a huge mitzvah. One of the ways of becoming impure is if you have a discharge, man or a woman, you have a discharge. Now, what the women, in order to transfer that impurity, that spiritual impurity, it's uncleanliness is a very poor way of translating it. Tuma is spiritual impurity. nothing wrong with it. It's natural, it's fine. But there are certain rules. If you're spiritually impure, there's certain things you can't do at a time, unless you go to the mikvah. So the women, in order to transfer, sometimes these impurities are transferable. If you want to transfer an impurity to an animal or to a piece of cloth, here in this case, fleece or like wool, it has to be detached from the animal. But while it's attached to a living animal, it cannot become impure. So they left it there to keep it as pure as possible until the last possible moment that they needed it. But it was an incredible feat that they were able to do. The Torah even goes on to say about it. It was an incredible skill to be able to spin wool while it was still on the goat. I just think it's very interesting. Does anybody have any questions? Whoa.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So this parsha is when they're actually building the Mishkan, correct? Whereas the previous parshiot were just Moshe receiving instructions, correct?
Yes. I mean, here they're giving everything. Yes, they are building. Yes, they are building. Yes. Yes. It's not in chronological order. There are sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't, right? We hold the opinion that it's not in chronological order. So there's an episode like the Parshas of Tzave. Part of the Parsha is there's parts of it which are the Mishkan's already built. Things are already crafted. The menorah is already built. But and then it reverts back because the Torah is not in chronological order.
Right. I don't think it's possible to even write such a very time-consuming event in a chronological order, even if you try, because life isn't that way. You're just trying to transfer all the message, and you're trying to put it in chronological order, but multiple things happen at the same time.
Yes, very good lesson. It's a very good point. It's a great point. Is that what your Aristeo? I'm sorry, did you?
Yeah, no, that helps. Thank you.
Okay.
I was just trying to get like a timeline here or something.
It's all happening at the same time.
Yeah,
apparently,
well,
apparently, sorry, Rabbi. Apparently, the golden calf thing was happening actually when Moses was still on Sinai, right? Like, it's like there's like some. It was actually before he came with the tablets, but it is written in Torah that it happened after or whatever, like on the later days when Moses was descending.
Yeah, so I think this is all taking place. It's up for disagreement in the commentaries, but it seems to be that most agree that this is taking place on right after Yom Kippur. Right after Yom Kippur, we're beginning to build the Beis Hamikdash. We're beginning to build the Mishkan. We are what's it called? We're forgiven, and God's way of showing that we're forgiven is okay. Now you can build my home. So we build our home, and then we finish it on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, 15 days before Passover. I don't know. If you want to know. That's seems to be the accepted opinion. Now the Ramban holds it's all in chronological order, right? That this is in chronological order. But see the Ramban for more details. Okay.
More to come. Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah. Okay, everybody. Have a good night. Tomorrow is I think Tanya with Rabbi Weinberg. Okay.
Bring Niggin class back.
Yeah, Niggin class. Good idea. Should do that. Maybe Pesach and Nigunim. That's not bad. That's not a good. That's a pretty good idea.
Yes.
Nigunim for the Haggadah. That's a good idea.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Have a good evening.
Yeah, thanks. Good night.
Go ahead. Thank you.